Let's get after it.
Let's do it.
Welcome to Sports Charlotte, the podcast about sports in Charlotte. My name is Herb White. I'm editor-in-chief of the Charlotte Post. And
As usual, but virtually today, Cameron
yeah,
Williams, staff writer for the Charlotte Post, doing
the
it via Zoom.
award-winning sports writing staff reporter at the
Okay, well,
Post.
I'm not going to boast my chest because you could say the same about yourself. The
Well,
Post took home, what was it, 9 awards at the NC Press
uh-huh,
Association Awards?
including a third for general excellence, which is a very nice feather to toss in the cap. But my thing is, if you're not going to talk about yourself, who will?
Well, you let other people. I've never been, I try not to be
Sometimes,
boastful.
sometimes you put it under the bushel and nobody gets to see it or talk about it. But I digress. Let's move to the subjects at hand. And the one that has a good chunk of Charlotte talking these days is the Carolina Panthers actually showed proof of life with
They look like a football team, Herb.
a professional one at that.
I'm sitting there watching that game, and I'm like, okay, Dalton's got the offense moving. They score first, and then I'm like, okay, they got some momentum. Get a couple stops on defense, and Chuba Hubbard played out of his mind. Had a really great game, and then the Ginger Avenger, as I heard him called on the radio, Andy Dalton had a tremendous game. Some of the throws I saw him make, especially the one that unfortunately got Adam Thielen hurt, but the one where he threw it over top of two defenders to a outstretched Adam Thielen. That was an incredible ball. 319 yards, 26 of 37, 3 touchdowns. Yeah, the Panthers look completely rejuvenated from where they were in weeks 1 and 2, and really from where they were all last season.
I will agree and co-sign on all that. And it's just amazing to me that national media spent a good chunk of last week tossing all kinds of dirt on the Panthers, and maybe even rightfully so in some instances. But I thought it was overkill because these are people who aren't even here most of the time, or dare I say, none of the time. And then when they mess around and win a game and win it convincingly, it's like, okay, let's just move on to the next thing that will get people to talking. So
Nah,
then,
you got to eat that crow is what they need to do.
we're talking about national media, so nah, they don't have much of an attention span, and they're not going to stick around for anything that can't draw comments, clicks, or whatever. So that's the way they roll, and there's nothing wrong with that. But just be aware that's what it's there for. It's not there to cover a specific team all the time, unless maybe it's the Dallas Cowboys. But that's another story.
Well, let's don't go down that rabbit hole.
Well, that's not. But judging from Sunday, and granted, it's only one game, it's a very small sample size. It looks like Dave Canales did the right thing in demoting Bryce Young. And most important, he gave this team a reason to go out and play hard.
Yeah, he did. And it might have been in haste, but when I saw that first drop by Dalton, I tweeted out, "Time to start shopping Bryce Young." But I think Bryce will have his time. I just don't think it's right now. I think he really needs to learn because what Andy Dalton put on the field, if Bryce can just take that and try to understand it and try to understand what the pro game is like. Bryce, if you watch his high school tapes, and yes, it's high school and it's college, but if you watch his old tapes, he looks so much more comfortable within the systems that he was in, whether it be a modern day or at Alabama. And he hasn't looked comfortable from the day he stepped onto the Panthers field. So take a step back, pull the Drake May, learn this year, and maybe it'll be his team next year. Who knows? Maybe they will shop him. I don't know who would necessarily want him after seeing what he's put on the field to this point, but there's no question in my mind that Bryce is talented, probably more talented than Andy Dalton, but it's just he's not there yet. And so what Dave Canales did was the right choice. The Panthers are going to have a really tough test coming to town this weekend. The Bengals, yes, they're winless, but very talented team. Really got some players hurt on defense, but I want to see how the Panthers put weeks together. Don't just have a good week and then go back to the same old, same old. Build weeks together. And I mean, if they get a win, we could be talking about the rejuvenated Panthers for real if they can get a convincing win against Joe Burrow and the boys from Cincy.
Well, I'm of the opinion that 1 or 2 weeks isn't going to make or break anything, but you do need to stack good weeks together. And if you can get to 2-2 after being miserable looking
Yeah.
0-2, those are steps in the right direction. And I think that if they can get some momentum going, then it could be kind of interesting just to see how this franchise works in terms of what it puts on the field with Dave Canales running the show.
Yeah.
And you made a point that that Bryce Young is probably more talented than Andy Dalton. I'm not even going to go there. I will say
I
that
think he
Andy
is.
Dalton is more accomplished and more
Sure.
polished. And that to me points up to what the NFL does not do a whole lot of. It does not develop talent. And when you have the number one overall draft pick, there's certain expectations. Fans demand that you play number one right out of the chute, no matter how much fine tuning that individual needs. And everything is associated with being the first round pick, and especially number one overall. You got to play him to see what he's capable of, or else he's a bust. And you just need to sometimes take a step back and say, if this is going to be our long-term investment, then we need to invest long-term and
Oh,
put
for certain.
not only some people around that individual to give him the best chance of success. You have to help these young people understand what it means to be a professional. And I think that is where the Panthers now have an opportunity with
Mhm.
with Andy Dalton running the show. They can take a step back with Bryce Young and say, well, you know what? This is what professional quarterbacking looks like. Learn from this man. We will help you. And when your turn comes, hopefully before that rookie contract is up, then you get a shot at doing the same thing.
I think his time will come. I just, like I said, it may not be this season, but let's not act like no. I'll go on record and say, and CJ Stroud was probably the better pick at number one. But let's not act like he hadn't experienced some growing pains. This past week was a big one. I mean, got demolished by the Vikings. Yes, he had over 200 yards passing, but threw two interceptions. Passer rating wasn't great. So these guys are young. The NFL it's a man's league, and so when you're yes, you're technically considered a man when you're 21, 22 years old, but at the same time, you're fresh out of college. Things move really quick in the NFL. Uh, it's funny. My mom likes to say professional sports almost look like it's slow motion, and I'm like, that's just because they're proficient at it and they do things at such a high level. It's really moving a lot faster than even the college game, especially the high school game. So give Bryce his time. I think sooner or later it'll be his team to take over, as long as they don't pull the plug on him too quickly.
Yeah. And Dave Canales, I can't overemphasize enough. He deserves major kudos for that because I'm sure there were all kinds of voices in his head going on both sides, bench him, play him. And obviously, at least for 1 week, the right voices prevailed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think so too. Are you all right? So I want to pose this question: are they going to go back to back weeks? Or are they gonna beat Cincy and send them to 0-4 at home?
I think they have as good a chance as anybody else. Granted, Cincinnati's going to be desperate. The Bengals have lost. Well, the Kansas City game was a classic. I mean, it came right down to the wire. So it's not like the Bengals can't play.
Yeah.
And they're going to be extra desperate. And after all of the national narrative about how nasty the Panthers are, you don't want to be the club that winds up losing to these guys. So I think it will be a good game if the Panthers show up. I
Yeah,
think Cincinnati will be there. The question is, will the Panthers be properly motivated to make it two in a row?
I'm all about giving predictions. Sorry, Panthers fans. I think it's going to step back to reality. Cincinnati is probably a harder opponent than Las Vegas. Yes, the records don't show that, but I'm going to say 31 to 21 Bengals.
Well,
Sorry.
well, and keep in mind now, this is also the Red Rifles revenge game.
31-21 Bengals.
Okay, all
I'll
right.
I'll I'll die on that hill.
Okay, well, we know you don't mind throwing it out there, so we'll see what that looks like on Saturday, on Sunday.
Yep.
Getting my days all mixed up. Uh, as far as the Saturday folks go, the Charlotte 49ers open AAC uh, play this week with a trip to Houston to take on the Rice Owls. 49ers have not looked all that impressive over their first four games, 1-3.
Mhm.
You went to the media get together today. What what did that look like?
Biff always opens up with his opening statements, and it's fine and dandy. But when he opens it up, saying it was a tough non-conference, but I'm paraphrasing, of course. But he says he thinks they got better. Huh. When I did my story on kind of three takeaways from the non-conference play, not a lot is suggesting that the team statistically got better week in and week out. And so when I try to digest that comment, I'm like, where did in what facet of the game did you get better from? Maybe yeah, I think there was some improvement from James Madison to Carolina, but I really didn't see that much improvement from the Carolina game to the Gardner Webb game to the Indiana game. Yes, they fought their tails off in that first quarter and a half, almost first half against Indiana, but from there it's just like Indiana just took over. Um, as they go into Rice, I think this could be a great opportunity. Rice, same record. They have played an AAC foe already, an Army, but they got beat handedly. Um, they haven't had, based on strength of schedule and based on all the ESPN analytics and stuff, quite as hard of a schedule as Charlotte. Their long win came against Texas Southern, I believe. So Charlotte probably more battle tested, but nonetheless a 7-point dog on the road. So if you're into all the theory behind making spreads and this, that, and the other. On a neutral field, if this game were played, say in New York, it'd be a 2-point Rice favorite because normally they say home field gives you about a 5-point advantage. So they're even teams as far as by the numbers. I just want to see some consistency from the 49ers. And what I mean by that is not just on the offensive side of the ball, but defense as well. The defense will show flashes, but then if the offense can't sustain drives and get up and stay on the field, the defense will tire out, and then you'll see the defensive consistency start to you know pull back. And so they're going to have to put their best foot forward for sure. I mean, Rice isn't going to lay down. They came into Charlotte last year and won 28-7, I believe. So it's going to be a tough game. Poggi knows that. He said they're the underdog, and they should be until they can prove that they can compete and they can hang with these teams. So tall task nonetheless on Saturday, but a great opportunity to get off on the right foot and start 1-0 in conference play.
What happens if the opposite happens? This is a winnable game, but it's by no means a gimme. And the toughest games are still yet to be played.
Oh, for sure. If the opposite happens, ugh, not a lot of good. Um, not, Biff looks at everything as an opportunity to get better, and yeah, fans don't like hearing that. Us as media, we have to digest that in a different way and say, okay, look, he's managing the expectations a lot better than he did last year, where he was like, okay, we got all these great players, we're just going to kill everybody. This year, he's really pulled back and has been reserved and is like, I know the capabilities of our players. We've got good players that can win ball games, but he didn't set the bar so high. Matter of fact, he said it pretty much where the floor was last season. Um, I think they need to win this game. Biff's never going to come out and say this is a must have game, because that, he says, puts their players in a bind and kind of puts them in a corner and makes them feel unneeded pressure. But they need this game because it's momentum heading into next week, which will be East Carolina, big in-state rivalry, if you will, at home. Niner Nation, I'm sure, is going to show out for that one, with it being that in-state rivalry. But they need to get off on the right foot, because coming off a loss in a game where East Carolina is playing a lot better than they did a season ago, they need to win Saturday. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right. That's fair enough. Now, in terms of other Charlotte 49ers news, you
Yeah.
had a lengthy, I mean, lengthy, we're talking about longer than the 23rd, some lengthy uh, article on athletic director Mike Hill and his uh, brand new 4-year contract extension, which
Yep.
obviously means he's not going anywhere. And the reaction of 49ers fans to that, not only in the story that you wrote, but also the reaction online.
Yeah. Well, for the people that only care about, as you like to call them, the barbershop sports, football and basketball, Mike hasn't had success in their minds at all. And that's fair if you only care about those specific sports. I mean, just from someone that talks to Mike more so regularly than the fan base, he wants to win in those sports. He really does. People might not see that based on just the failed hires, if you will. A lot of people say, Ron Sanchez and Will Healy, they were failed hires, and this, that, and the other. There's a desire there to win in those sports, and he knows when you win in those sports, it not only increases visibility, it increases revenue, and all these things that come with that. But he doesn't want to sacrifice the success that the 49ers have had under his leadership in other sports. And we're talking double digit conference championships in the last 2 to 3 years across Olympic sports. Tennis is doing really well. Golf, men's and women's, has done really well. Baseball, softball, under the leadership of Robert Woodard and Ashley Chastain. And he's excited about Courtney, their new softball coach. So he doesn't want to sacrifice being well rounded, but at the same time, he knows there's an urgency to be good in those barbershop sports. And I think he does have a plan moving forward. And so, like him or hate him, he is going to be around a while now. Um, I wanted to put a story out there that I deemed very fair. I talked about Will Healy's record, had a great first year. After that, it wasn't so great. That's why Mike decided to let him go. I talked about Ron Sanchez, and yes, he was better than the Mark Price era, but he wasn't to the level that he wants the basketball program to be and what fans want the basketball program to be. So he's not going to keep coaches around longer than he deems necessary. Um, to some fans, they have a coach around for 4 or 5 games, and if they're not performing to their expectations, they'd axe them after that amount of time. I mean, you just look at Aaron Firm when he took over. The basketball team wasn't doing stellar, but then he goes on that 8, 9 game win streak or whatever in conference play. They finished third in the conference, and yes, they didn't win an American Conference tournament game, but to finish third when you were projected, I think, third or second to last in the league, that's a huge accomplishment. And so he thinks basketball's moving in the right direction to get back to those Bobby Lutz glory days. And he's still kind of in the experimental phase with Biff. I'm sure he's going to make the right decision when that time comes to either keep him around or let him go. But I think the vision's there. I just think no one's ever going to be satisfied with progress until they see sustained progress. And I just wrote what I deemed to be a fair piece.
So, what is the temperature like for the 49ers faithful, and understanding that fans are going to complain and grouse and just be miserable no matter what? and you can be undefeated and folks will find stuff to pick on. But
Mm-hmm.
what is the general feeling to this extension?
I think the general feeling, okay, I think you have to separate the two. I think the general feeling from the majority of the fans that only care about football and basketball, which I dare say is probably upwards of 90% of fans, they aren't very fond of him. And honestly, if you would just talk with Mike and have conversation with him, he knows that. But as an athletics director, it's not his job to solely focus on those, although they are important to him. I think for the small percentage of fans that see the bigger picture, and I tried to get fans when I did the story that kind of did see the bigger picture, and they understand that yes, basketball and football aren't where they need to be, and that they aren't happy with where it is. But they understand that Mike has had success in other sports, and so if he can translate his success in other sports to football and basketball, they can get going on the right direction. So I think if you split the two down the middle and say, okay, for the 10 to 15% of fans that try to see the whole picture, they're okay with Mike. They want him to do better in those barbershop sports, but they're not going to say, oh, he's awful because they see his success in other areas. Whereas the, the larger percentage of fans that only care about football and basketball, they probably want him gone. I mean, if we're being honest, they probably want him gone. I think that's where the temperature is, but they at least got him for 4 more years.
And I think you can also say that there's probably a third group, people who have no affiliation to Charlotte, which is
Well, there's that too.
yeah,
And
and because
go ahead.
but they would also be more than likely, because they're not on the campus, they have no affiliation. All they know is football and basketball because that's what
Yeah,
gets the attention. And if it's not doing very well on that front, then it's like, you know, I'm not going over there for soccer or tennis or anything else. And I'm not going over there for football or basketball if I'm of the opinion or if I believe the narrative that those programs are struggling.
yeah. And I mean, I said earlier the reason I got the two fans that I did get is because I know another thing is I know they donate. I know they're alumni. I think Jimmy Touchstone was class of '93 and Rodney Graves '97, so they're alums that have been around the programs, all the athletic programs now for a long time. They've been donating season ticket holders in various sports, so they're putting back into the athletic programs too. So for those fair weather fans that aren't giving and all this stuff and don't give because they're not having success, I think I don't really know how to put it, but it's like if you're not putting back into the organization, putting back into the athletics department, you don't see the vision there moving forward anyway. So, I mean, not that your voice isn't heard, but at the same time, I got fans that I knew were giving back to the athletics department because they care. And so, if you truly care, and if you're truly an alum that cares, I think you give back. So that's why I got who I got. But overall, if you want to lump them together, overall, people probably aren't fond of Mike. But I mean, Mike texted me after he read the piece, and he's like, it was very fair. There have been shortcomings in basketball and football, but I appreciate that you didn't just focus on that. You also brought up the fact that there was some success too. So I did my best job writing a fair piece, not just writing this fluff piece that boosted them up, but also not just tearing them down either.
Okay. So we're good on campus right now. Moving to high schools, a different kind of campus. This is our first reveal of the Magnificent Seven for this week.
Ooh.
And there is a change, not at number one. Number one is still Independence. So there's no doubt on that one. The only unbeaten team in the Magnificent Seven at 4-0. And they play Charlotte Catholic this week. Ought to be a pretty good game. Number two this week is Huff. This is the
Hmm.
This is the Queen City 3A 4A portion of our schedule here.
Mallard Creek didn't jump them.
No, no. Mallard Creek did
Mm.
move up to third though. And so Huff was already in third last week, so they move up one. They've won 3 straight. They're in a good spot. Mallard Creek has won 3 straight after beating West Charlotte last week. And keep in mind, they beat West Charlotte on the road, which is great, by 1 point. And
It was
who
a slobber
knows,
knocker, boy.
yeah, and who knows what the result of that game would have been if West Charlotte had a kicker around on the roster. Who knows what that would have looked like? I'm just saying that people love to talk about offense and defense, but winning football requires special teams too. And
And who knows what the result would have been had there not been a commotion in the stands that had everybody clear out, and then they completed the game with no fans. And man, that's another topic we don't have time to get into today. But it's like, stop the violence, man. I mean, both
or to
coaches said it
stop
very
the
well after the game.
knuckleheadedness, let's put it like
That
that.
that too. Both coaches said it after the game. The majority of these fans that are coming to watch this game to enjoy it aren't here for all that. So if you want to start something, leave that at home. You just stay at home. You had no business being at the game. But anyway, moving back to the topic at hand, which is the actual football game.
Yes, West Charlotte is fourth. Yeah, they played a really good game in the second half. Looked a little off kilter early, but made a good run. Fell short. Again, you got to fix those special teams because you're going to need them when the playoffs start and that weather starts to turn. Not
Yeah.
everybody can roll up and down the field and get the job done that way. You're going to have to use that kicking game to your advantage somehow. Fifth is another school from Queen City 3A 4A, Hopewell. I'm just putting that out there. 3 straight.
Gentry, my guy.
And they're going to get a test because they're playing Mallard Creek. So we will find out exactly how good they are when they roll over to take on the Mavericks. We're going to find out some stuff real fast when it comes to that game. Number 6 is Olympic. They got back on the road to Healing after losing to Shelby. And so they're in a good spot now. And they play Valentine Ridge Friday. And number 7
should be a win.
it should be. Number 7 is Palisades, which is the only 2-loss team in this group. But the Pumas beat up on Barry Academy 38-0. And it was their best win of the season. And next up is Myers Park in a SOMEC 4A game. So
That'll be a good game. That'll be a real good test. And I think if Myers wins, they probably should get the bump up. We'll see. I mean, now if Charlotte Catholic goes out and pulls off the upset against Independence, they definitely be in the rankings, I assume, next week. That'll cause the whole thing to kind of be tipsy turvy or topsy turvy, however you say that.
Topsy-turvy, yeah. It might be tipsy-turvy too, depending on who's
Yeah.
But that's our look at the Magnificent Seven. A little bit of movement, but we are getting to that part of the season where you can expect a lot more movement. And that's what makes high school football in Mecklenburg County so interesting. Sooner or later, you're going to run into some good teams. And especially in the Queen City 3A, 4A, you're going to run into a lot of good teams, which makes for some great
for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely, most definitely. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a solid ranking. I definitely think there's going to be a lot of, like you mentioned, now that we're in conference play, there's going to be a lot of solid games to be played. But I guess this is kind of our first go at 2 times a week with the podcast. So I'm sure we'll be back later in the week and more sports. Gotta love it.
Yeah, we're trying to be more respectful of our listeners and viewers' time. So we're not going to overburden you with a whole bunch of us talking at one sitting. So we're already pushing the envelope on this edition. So we will leave it right there. And until next time, I'm Herb.
And I'm Cam.
And from all of us over in beautiful Derrida, thanks for watching and listening.